My parents insisted I study law. It's a family tradition, they said. But when I graduated, they forced me to defend them in a legal battle, because I was the only one who could keep their secrets. I always knew my family was a little unorthodox. Our dinners weren't filled with casual conversations about school or weekend plans. They were filled with my parents, Camille and Gideon, drilling me about legal cases and ethics like it was some twisted dinner table law class. And every time I thought I had a choice about my future, they'd look at me with that unyielding gaze and say, "Law is in our blood, Alaric. It's a family tradition." It was an unspoken rule in our house, one that echoed through every wall of our creaky old Victorian home in Kansas City. That house felt like a courthouse itself. Stately. Austere. Filled with heavy, dusty bookshelves and worn-down leather furniture that gave off the faint scent of old paper and even older secrets. The portraits of relatives stared down at me from every angle, as if judging my every step. "Imagine it, Alaric," my mother would say, leaning back in her chair with a smile. "You could be one of the best, like your father, like me." I'd nod along, try to feel the pride they seemed to expect. But inside, I wasn't sure I wanted that life. The endless law books, the rigid moral debates, the sacrifices my parents made for their careers, I wasn't like them. I wanted to explore, see what else the world had to offer. But the weight of their expectations was crushing. When I finally graduated from law school, Camille threw me a huge party. Everyone from our esteemed family was there, the air thick with pride and cheap wine. My father even gave a toast, rare for him, as he was usually the type to sit back in stony silence, arms crossed, judging the room with a stony gaze. "To Alaric," he said, holding his glass high, his voice carrying through the crowd. "The next defender of justice in our family, may he uphold the values we hold dear and may he be ready for the challenges ahead." Everyone clinked their glasses, oblivious to the unspoken subtext hanging in the air. I had been groomed, molded, and now I was on the precipice of being used. It started just a few weeks later. I'd barely begun applying for positions at a few Kansas City firms when I got a call from my mother. She sounded different. Almost frantic. "Alaric," she said, her voice sharp and breathy. "We need you to come to the house. Now." "What's going on? Is everything okay?" I felt a surge of worry, but I couldn't place why. "Just come, please." When I arrived, the house was almost too quiet, like it was holding its breath. My father was in his chair, his face stony, his hands clenched tightly around a glass of whiskey. My mother sat beside him, her hands wringing a tissue to shreds in her lap. I could tell something was deeply, terribly wrong. "Alaric," my father said, his voice cold. "We have a situation. And we need your help." I could feel a chill run through me. "What kind of situation?" My mother looked at my father, eyes wide and pleading. He sighed and leaned forward. "There are some irregularities in our past cases. Legal issues. Misunderstandings." He avoided my gaze, his tone too calm. "It's more complicated than it sounds. We just need you to handle it for us." I blinked. "You want me to represent you? For irregularities?" My mother's voice was desperate, trembling. "Alaric, please. We trust you. We don't want to go to anyone else. You're our son. You know us." I felt the familiar weight of their expectations pressing down on me. "Okay," I said slowly. "But you need to tell me everything. I can't help if I don't know what I'm dealing with." My father's jaw clenched. "It's not ideal for you to know every detail. Some things we've done were unconventional." "Unconventional?" My voice came out harsher than I'd intended. "Dad, I'm not a kid anymore. If you want me to help, you need to be honest with me." My mother placed a hand on his arm, and he closed his eyes briefly, looking pained. "Fine," he said, almost grudgingly. "We bent the rules. Here and there. You know how the legal system can be. Messy." "Messy?" I repeated, feeling anger bubble up. "You're telling me this now?" "Alaric," my mother interjected, her voice soft but urgent. "Listen to me. We didn't do this lightly. Every decision we made to protect our family's name, to keep our clients safe. You have to understand that sometimes sacrifices are necessary." My head was spinning. I felt like I was being sucked into a whirlpool, caught between my duty as a lawyer and my loyalty as a son. "And you want me to cover this up?" My father's eyes hardened. "You're not covering anything up. You're defending us. Like a good lawyer should." The next several months were a blur of depositions, late-night strategy sessions, and grueling battles with evidence I wasn't sure I could ethically defend. I went against everything I'd learned, twisting facts, bending truths, all for them. I felt like a marionette, a puppet, with my parents pulling the strings. Every time I questioned my role in the case, my mother would corner me, her face tight with worry. "Alaric, you don't understand. We've spent our lives building our careers, our reputations. Do you want to see us lose everything?" And every time, I swallowed my doubts and did what they asked. My parents' voices echoed in my mind like a chant: law is in our blood. It's a family tradition. The trial finally came to an end, and against all odds, and all ethics, they were acquitted. A technicality, a loophole, something we'd found in the dark hours of a sleepless night. They walked free. I thought they'd be grateful, that they'd thank me for saving them. But the moment we walked out of that courtroom, everything changed. They barely looked at me. My mother was smiling, laughing with their other attorney, who they'd hired behind my back for consultation. My father shook the other lawyer's hand with a kind of respect he'd never shown me. "Alaric." I called out to my mother, watching as she turned with that same cold, detached expression. I thought. "What?" She cut me off, her voice clipped. "Alaric, we're very grateful. But we need to move on. We'll handle things from here." Just like that, I was disposable. The son they'd molded and manipulated, the lawyer they'd pressured and bullied, it all meant nothing. "Are you serious?" I demanded, feeling my voice crack with the betrayal. "After everything, you're just done with me?" My mother shrugged, her gaze cool. "You're our son, Alaric, but this is business. You knew what you signed up for." I left that day, and I didn't look back. I moved to a small apartment across town, cut ties with them, and tried to drown out the anger, the betrayal, with work, with anything to distract me. I felt like a shell of myself, haunted by the role I'd played in letting them walk free. I couldn't escape the guilt, the feeling that I was just as corrupt as they were. But just when I thought I could finally move on, an email appeared in my inbox one icy November morning. The subject line read, "New evidence regarding Camille and Gideon Price." I clicked on it, heart pounding. It was from Malcolm Rostow, an old associate of my parents. I barely knew him, but his name was one I'd heard in whispers. "Alaric," the email began, "I hate to intrude, but I've recently uncovered information that you might want to know. It pertains to your parents' past cases. Cases that you may have been kept in the dark about." My hand shook as I read on. Malcolm's email laid out a hidden history, a trail of deceit, money laundering, shell companies, embezzlement, all masterminded by my parents. They had groomed me not just to be a lawyer, but their contingency plan, their insurance policy. It hit me like a punch to the gut. They hadn't loved me. They hadn't been proud of me. I was a tool, a shield to protect them from the consequences they'd always known were inevitable. I spent the next few weeks in a daze, torn between the urge for revenge and the need for closure. A dark, bitter anger brewed inside me, but beneath it, I felt something else, something almost more unbearable. I wanted to know why. I wanted to confront them, to make them see what they'd done. So I booked a ticket back to Kansas City, clutching the stack of evidence Malcolm had sent, my heart heavy with questions I wasn't sure I'd ever get answers to. When I arrived back in Kansas City, everything felt smaller, darker, like the whole city was cast in shadows. My parents' house looked different, too, as if the secrets it held had seeped into the walls. I stood outside, clutching Malcolm's documents like a weapon. I knocked, and after a pause, my mother opened the door, her smile freezing when she saw me. "Alaric," she said, attempting a casual tone. "We weren't expecting you." I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, feeling a chill creep up my spine as I passed familiar photos and furniture, each piece reminding me of the weight of my family's manipulation. My father sat in his usual armchair, looking up from his paper with a raised eyebrow. "Gideon," I greeted him coldly. Using his first name wasn't lost on either of them. It was a subtle statement that I was no longer their obedient son. I was here as their equal, maybe even as their judge. "What's this all about, Alaric?" my father asked, his tone curt and dismissive, as though I were some pesky client interrupting his day. I pulled out the stack of papers Malcolm had sent, spreading them on the coffee table like I was laying out cards in a game they didn't know how to play. "This," I said, letting each word hang in the air, "is everything." My mother's face paled as she saw the bank transactions, the fake companies, the emails between her and shady clients. My father stiffened, his jaw clenched as he leaned forward, his eyes scanning the damning evidence with a growing fury. "Where did you get these?" he demanded, his voice barely more than a growl. "An old friend of yours," I said, relishing the way his face darkened. "Someone who thinks I deserve the truth, unlike you." "Alaric, you don't understand," my mother began, her voice wavering as she reached for my arm. "We did this for you, for us. We needed to protect what we'd built, to secure the family legacy." "For me?" I laughed, shaking her hand off with disgust. "You did it all for yourselves. You didn't care about my future or my happiness. You just wanted a puppet to clean up your mess." They tried to argue, to reason with me, but I saw them clearly for the first time. They weren't the righteous figures they'd claimed to be. They were scared, weak, selfish. I felt a strange calm settle over me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. "I've made a choice," I told them, folding my arms as I looked down at them. "I'm taking all of this to the authorities." My father's face twisted in rage. You ungrateful little, he stopped himself, his expression hardening. You'd ruin your own family? For what? To feel morally superior? It's not about that, I said quietly. It's about doing what's right. Something you taught me, ironically. My mother's voice softened to a pleading whisper. Alaric, please. You can't go to them. We'll lose everything. We'll go to prison. That's not my problem, I replied coldly, my resolve hardening as I saw the fear in their eyes. I spent my whole life carrying your weight, hiding your lies. I'm done. They begged, bargaining with promises, with money, even with love. But their words fell flat. I was done being manipulated, done being their pawn. I turned and walked out, their voices fading as I left the house. The next day, I walked into the Kansas City District Attorney's office, clutching Malcolm's files, my heart pounding. I handed everything over to the prosecutor, feeling a weight lift off me that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. The prosecutor's eyes widened as he flipped through the evidence, understanding the significance of each page. Thank you for bringing this in, Alaric, he said, his tone solemn. You're doing the right thing. I know, I replied, feeling a calm satisfaction settle over me. Over the next few months, I watched from a distance as the case unfolded. My parents were arrested, their high-profile trial becoming the talk of Kansas City. Every secret they'd hidden, every lie they'd told, was dragged into the light. They tried to defend themselves, but without me as their lawyer, their web of deceit unraveled. In the end, they were found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The judge didn't hold back, handing down the maximum sentence. The court buzzed with murmurs as the verdict was read, but I just sat there, feeling a strange kind of peace settle over me. I had finally freed myself from their grip. Afterward, I left the courtroom, not even glancing back. I had no intention of visiting them in prison, no intention of ever speaking to them again. They had chosen their path, and now they were paying the price. For the first time in my life, I was truly free.